I stand before you today with a heart both heavy and hopeful. Heavy because our world trembles under the weight of division, hatred, and fear. Hopeful because I still believe that somewhere deep within the human spirit lives a dream too powerful to die. The dream is not dead because it was never confined to a single moment in history, nor was it dependent upon one voice, one march, or one generation. It was born from the deepest longing of humanity, the longing to be seen, to be valued, to live with dignity and justice. Though it has been challenged by oppression, scarred by violence, and delayed by indifference, it continues to breathe in the conscience of humankind. A dream rooted in justice cannot perish simply because it faces resistance. The dream lives wherever people refuse to accept inequality as normal. It lives in the hearts of those who question systems that benefit a few at the expense of many. It survives in classrooms where teachers nurture possibility in children who have been told they are less. It rises in communities where ordinary citizens organize, vote, advocate, and stand peacefully against injustice. Every act of courage, no matter how small, becomes evidence that the dream still walks among us. Some may say the dream has faded because division is loud and hatred often commands headlines. Yet noise is not proof of victory. In times of turmoil, the presence of struggle often reveals that change is unfolding. The resistance to justice exposes how powerful the dream truly is, because oppressive systems do not fight what is weak. They fight what threatens to transform them. The persistence of the dream can be seen in the very backlash against it, for only something alive provokes fear in the structures of injustice. The dream is also carried in the language of hope spoken by young people across the world. Each generation reinterprets it, reshapes it, and expands its meaning. Where earlier voices fought segregation, newer voices confront economic disparity, climate injustice, discrimination, and systemic inequality. The issues may evolve, but the heartbeat remains the same. The conviction that every human being deserves fairness and opportunity. This continuity across generations proves that the dream is not a relic, but a living force adapting to new realities. Moreover, the dream survives because it is sustained by collective memory. Stories of past struggles remind society that progress, though slow, is possible. They show that change has occurred before and can occur again. When communities gather to remember movements for civil rights and social transformation, they reaffirm their commitment to unfinished work. Memory becomes both teacher and motivator, reinforcing the understanding that setbacks do not erase achievements. The dream is not sustained by perfection. It is sustained by persistence. Even when progress seems to reverse, individuals continue to act with compassion, integrity, and moral courage. The dream thrives in quiet conversations that challenge prejudice, in policies that expand access, in art that imagines equality, and in faith communities that preach inclusion. It exists in daily choices that affirm humanity over hatred, cooperation over conflict, and service over selfishness. It endures in the unwavering belief that justice is not an abstract ideal, but a responsibility shared by all. Unity over division is not a passive wish for harmony, but an active commitment to bridge the gaps that separate humanity. Division often begins with fear of difference, fear of scarcity, fear of losing power or identity. These fears are then amplified by rhetoric, misinformation, and historical wounds left unhealed. Yet unity does not require uniformity. It does not demand that people abandon their cultures, beliefs, or perspectives. Instead, it calls for the recognition that diversity can coexist with shared purpose, and that differences need not become barriers to dignity and cooperation. A divided society fragments itself along lines of race, class, religion, politics, and nationality. These divisions create invisible walls that limit empathy and foster suspicion. When individuals begin to see one another as opponents rather than neighbors, mistrust grows and dialogue collapses. Unity challenges this pattern by insisting that human worth is not determined by affiliation or background. It invites people to step beyond labels and rediscover their common humanity. In doing so, it weakens the narratives that thrive on separation and replaces them with a vision rooted in mutual respect. Choosing unity requires courage because division is often easier. It is simpler to remain within echo chambers where opinions are reinforced and differences are dismissed. It is more comfortable to blame others for social problems than to engage in difficult conversations. Unity demands listening, not listening to respond or refute, but listening to understand. It involves acknowledging historical injustices and present inequalities without retreating into defensiveness. Through honest dialogue, individuals begin to see the complexities of one another's experiences, and empathy becomes a bridge over misunderstanding. Unity also calls for shared responsibility. Social challenges such as poverty, discrimination, violence, and environmental degradation do not affect isolated groups alone. They ripple across entire communities. When people recognize that their well-being is interconnected, cooperation becomes a practical necessity rather than a moral abstraction. Policies grounded in unity aim to expand opportunity, protect rights, and ensure fairness for all rather than privileging one group at the expense of another. In this sense, unity strengthens democratic institutions by encouraging participation and accountability across differences. At a personal level, unity begins with small actions, acts of kindness towards strangers, willingness to collaborate across cultural boundaries, and readiness to challenge prejudice in everyday situations. These gestures may seem minor, yet they accumulate into a broader culture of inclusion. Educational spaces that celebrate diversity, workplaces that prioritize equity, and communities that foster dialogue contribute to a social fabric resilient against divisive forces. Unity grows when individuals refuse to let stereotypes define relationships and instead cultivate curiosity and openness. In times of polarization, unity becomes an act of resistance against narratives that seek to fracture society for gain. It asserts that disagreement need not escalate into hostility and that cooperation is not weakness but strength. By embracing unity over division, communities lay the groundwork for sustainable progress, recognizing that collective advancement depends on solidarity, shared vision, and the unwavering affirmation of human dignity. The power of nonviolence rests in its ability to confront injustice without surrendering to hatred. It is often misunderstood as passivity or weakness, yet in truth it demands immense discipline, courage, and moral clarity. To practice nonviolence is to resist oppression without mirroring the very cruelty one seeks to overcome. It is a deliberate refusal to allow anger to dictate action and a conscious choice to answer harm with dignity rather than retaliation. In this way, nonviolence transforms protest into a moral force capable of exposing injustice to the conscience of society. Nonviolence operates on the belief that every human being possesses inherent worth, even those who perpetuate injustice. By refusing to dehumanize opponents, it seeks not their destruction, but their transformation. This approach disrupts cycles of vengeance that often escalate conflict and deepen divisions. Violence may silence opposition temporarily, but it rarely changes hearts or dismantles unjust systems at their core. Nonviolence, by contrast, reveals the moral contradictions of oppression, compelling observers to question and reconsider established norms. When injustice is met with peaceful resistance, the brutality of the oppressor becomes more visible and less defensible. The discipline of nonviolence requires preparation and collective commitment. It involves training the mind to remain steady under provocation and organizing communities around shared principles of restraint and solidarity. Participants in nonviolent movements must be willing to endure discomfort, criticism, and even suffering without retaliating. This endurance is not acceptance of wrongdoing, but strategic resilience. By maintaining composure, nonviolent actors shift the focus from confrontation to the injustice itself, drawing attention to the issues rather than the conflict. Nonviolence also wields the power of numbers. When individuals join together in peaceful demonstrations, boycotts, and acts of civil disobedience, they reveal the strength of collective will. Such actions demonstrate that authority ultimately depends on the consent and cooperation of the governed. By withdrawing participation from unjust systems, communities assert their agency without resorting to physical force. This strategy undermines oppressive structures by exposing their reliance on compliance and fear. At its core, nonviolence is rooted in the conviction that love is stronger than hate. This love is not sentimental affection, but a steadfast commitment to justice and reconciliation. It seeks to create conditions in which former adversaries can coexist with mutual respect. By appealing to shared humanity, nonviolence opens space for dialogue and reform. It rejects the idea that conflict must produce permanent enemies and instead imagines the possibility of restored relationships and equitable systems. The power of nonviolence extends beyond political movements into everyday life. It influences how individuals respond to conflict in families, workplaces, and communities. Choosing patience over aggression, conversation over hostility, and understanding over resentment reinforces the broader culture of peace. Each nonviolent response challenges the assumption that force is the most effective solution to disagreement. Through consistent practice, nonviolence reshapes expectations about how power is exercised and how change is achieved, demonstrating that strength guided by conscience can alter the course of history. Moral responsibility begins with the recognition that neutrality in the face of injustice is not innocence, but participation. Every individual exists within networks of social, political, and economic relationships that shape the conditions of others. To benefit from a system while ignoring its harms is to accept its consequences. Moral responsibility asks individuals to examine not only their actions, but also their silence, their indifference, and their willingness to overlook inequity for the sake of comfort. It calls for awareness that the absence of direct harm does not absolve one from accountability when harm persists around them. This responsibility is grounded in conscience, the inner voice that distinguishes right from wrong, even when laws or customs fail to do so. Laws may permit discrimination, traditions may normalize exclusion, and majorities may justify unfair practices. Yet conscience urges individuals to measure actions against principles of justice and human dignity. Moral responsibility, therefore, transcends convenience and popularity. It may require standing apart from prevailing opinions, questioning long-held beliefs, and challenging institutions that appear unchangeable. Such courage is rarely easy, but it reflects a commitment to values that honor the humanity of all people. Moral responsibility also involves empathy, the capacity to recognize oneself in the struggles of others. When individuals understand that suffering is not isolated but interconnected, they begin to see injustice as a shared concern rather than someone else's burden. Empathy dismantles the illusion that inequality affecting one group leaves others untouched. Economic disparity, discrimination, violence, and environmental degradation ripple outward, shaping entire communities. Recognizing this interconnectedness deepens the sense that action is not optional but necessary for collective well-being. Taking moral responsibility requires more than personal conviction. It demands tangible action. This may include advocating for equitable policies, supporting marginalized communities, voting with informed awareness, educating oneself about systemic issues, and confronting prejudice in everyday interactions. Small acts accumulate into cultural shifts, while organized efforts influence structural change. Responsibility becomes meaningful when it translates into choices that align with ethical principles. Without action, values remain abstract ideals detached from lived reality. There is also a dimension of self-reflection within moral responsibility. Individuals must continually evaluate their own biases, privileges, and blind spots. Growth requires humility, the willingness to admit error and learn from others. Moral responsibility is not a static achievement, but an ongoing process of alignment between belief and behavior. As societies evolve, new challenges emerge, and ethical reflection must adapt accordingly. Remaining attentive to these shifts ensures that responsibility does not stagnate into complacency. In times of crisis, moral responsibility becomes especially urgent. Moments of social tension test whether individuals will retreat into self-interest or step forward in solidarity. History often remembers those who acted when action carried risk and those who remained silent when their voices were needed. Responsibility calls individuals to resist apathy and to recognize their potential influence, however limited it may seem. By embracing moral responsibility, people affirm that justice depends not solely on leaders or institutions, but on the everyday decisions of ordinary individuals willing to align their lives with the demands of conscience. Hope as resistance emerges in moments when despair appears justified and surrender seems reasonable. It is not a denial of suffering, nor is it blind optimism that ignores harsh realities. Instead, it is a deliberate stance taken in full awareness of injustice, inequality, and hardship. Hope becomes resistance when individuals refuse to allow oppressive conditions to define the limits of what is possible. In choosing hope, they challenge narratives that insist change cannot occur and that systems of power are permanent and unshakable. Despair often functions as a tool of control. When communities are convinced that their voices do not matter, participation declines and injustice deepens. Hopelessness breeds apathy, and apathy sustains the status quo. Hope disrupts this cycle by restoring belief in agency. It encourages individuals to envision alternatives to current conditions and to act in pursuit of them. In this sense, hope is not passive waiting but active engagement, grounded in the conviction that efforts, however small, contribute to broader transformation. Hope also reshapes perception. Where others see insurmountable barriers, hope sees challenges that demand creativity and solidarity. It reframes setbacks as temporary obstacles rather than final defeats. This reframing does not erase pain, but situates it within a longer narrative of struggle and progress. By viewing hardship as part of an ongoing journey, individuals maintain the resilience necessary to continue advocating for justice. Hope fuels perseverance, enabling people to withstand criticism, resistance, and delay without abandoning their commitments. As resistance, hope is deeply communal. It spreads through shared stories, collective action, and mutual encouragement. When individuals gather to speak about their visions for a more equitable society, they strengthen one another's resolve. Movements for social change often rely on the sustaining power of hope, expressed through art, music, literature, and public demonstration. These expressions cultivate a sense of belonging and shared purpose, countering isolation and reinforcing determination. Hope becomes a unifying force that binds individuals together in pursuit of common goals. Hope as resistance also demands imagination. It requires envisioning structures of justice that do not yet fully exist and believing in their feasibility. This imaginative capacity challenges the assumption that current systems are the only possible arrangements. By articulating visions of fairness, inclusion, and opportunity, hopeful individuals create blueprints for reform. Their ideas inspire dialogue and experimentation, opening pathways that might otherwise remain unexplored. Imagination transforms hope from abstract feeling into constructive planning. There is courage embedded in hopeful resistance. To hope publicly in times of cynicism invites skepticism and sometimes ridicule. Yet choosing hope affirms faith in human potential and moral progress. It declares that history is not fixed and that collective effort can redirect its course. Each act rooted in hope, whether educating others, organizing peacefully, or extending compassion, pushes back against forces that rely on fear and resignation. Through sustained commitment, hope as resistance nurtures resilience, strengthens solidarity, and keeps alive the possibility of a more just and humane society. Collective action arises from the understanding that individual effort, while valuable, gains transformative power when joined with the efforts of others. It is rooted in the recognition that many social challenges are too complex and deeply embedded to be addressed by isolated voices. When individuals unite around shared concerns, their combined strength amplifies demands for justice and accountability. Collective action transforms scattered frustrations into organized momentum, shifting the balance of influence from a few to the many. At its core, collective action depends on solidarity. Solidarity is the conscious decision to stand with others, even when their struggles differ from one's own immediate experience. It acknowledges that injustice affecting one group ultimately weakens the entire community. By linking arms across lines of race, class, religion, and ideology, participants affirm that their futures are interconnected. This sense of shared destiny fosters trust and mutual responsibility, essential elements for sustained collaboration. Organization is another vital component of collective action. Effective movements do not rely solely on emotion or spontaneous protest. They cultivate strategy, leadership, and coordination. Meetings, community forums, and advocacy campaigns provide spaces where ideas are exchanged and goals clarified. Clear objectives help participants channel their energy toward achievable milestones while keeping long-term visions in focus. Through structure and planning, collective action becomes disciplined rather than chaotic, purposeful rather than reactive. Collective action also empowers those who might otherwise feel voiceless. In many societies, marginalized individuals lack access to platforms where their concerns can be heard. When people gather in large numbers to speak, march, vote, or petition, they demonstrate that their experiences cannot be dismissed as isolated incidents. Visibility becomes a tool for accountability. Institutions are more likely to respond when confronted with unified constituencies demanding change. In this way, collective action reshapes power dynamics, reminding leaders that authority ultimately derives from the consent and participation of the governed. Communication plays a central role in sustaining collective efforts. Shared narratives, symbols, and messages help unify diverse participants under common themes. Stories of injustice and resilience circulate within communities, strengthening commitment and reinforcing purpose. Modern technology expands the reach of these messages, enabling coordination across regions and even nations. While tools may evolve, the underlying principle remains consistent. People connected by information and shared values can mobilize more effectively than those acting alone. Collective action is not without challenges. Differences in perspective, strategy, and priority can create tension within movements. Navigating these differences requires patience, dialogue, and compromise. Strong movements cultivate inclusive decision-making processes that honor diverse contributions while maintaining coherence. The ability to manage internal disagreements without fracturing strengthens resilience and ensures longevity. Ultimately, collective action reflects faith in democratic participation and communal strength. It asserts that ordinary individuals, when united, possess the capacity to influence policies, transform institutions, and redefine cultural norms. Through sustained cooperation, shared sacrifice, and coordinated advocacy, communities move from awareness to impact, from isolated concern to organized pursuit of justice and equity. And so, my brothers and sisters, as we stand in a world that is often fractured by fear and divided by difference, let us remember that the dream we carry is stronger than the forces that seek to scatter it. It lives in our unity. It breathes through our nonviolence. It grows through our moral responsibility. It marches with our collective action, and it shines through our unyielding hope. We are not powerless in the face of injustice. We are not voiceless in the presence of oppression. Each step we take toward love, each stand we make for justice, each bridge we build across division becomes a testimony that the dream still walks among us. Let us leave with courage in our hearts and conviction in our spirits. Let us refuse the comfort of silence when truth must be spoken. Let us refuse the temptation of hatred when love demands expression. Let us refuse the paralysis of despair when hope calls us to act. For when we carry the dream together, we become stronger than any force that tries to break us. When we stand together, united in purpose and bound by our shared humanity, we bend the arc of our time toward justice. Go forth with faith. Go forth with determination. Go forth carrying the dream, and let your life be the living proof that it still endures.